The year was 1845, and the world still had blank spaces. On every map of the Northern Hemisphere there was a white void, a place where no ship had ever returned from, and no man had survived long enough to tell what he had seen. It was called the Arctic, and at its frozen heart lay a dream that had haunted empires for centuries, the Northwest Passage. For Britain, it was more than a dream. It was an obsession. Whoever found a sea route across the top of the world would control global trade, shorten voyages between Europe and Asia by months, and claim the last great triumph of navigation. By the mid-19th century, only one nation had the ships, science, and sheer confidence to try, and one man was chosen to lead the effort. His name was Sir John Franklin, a seasoned naval officer, 60 years old, and already a legend. He had fought at Trafalgar, survived Arctic winters before, and been knighted for exploration. But he was also a man desperate for redemption. His last expedition, a disastrous overland trek through Canada, had ended with starvation, mutiny, and death. Now, this was his final chance to reclaim his name. In the spring of 1845, two ships were prepared at Woolwich Dockyard, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Both had been used in previous polar expeditions, but this time they were fortresses of steel and oak, modified for the most advanced voyage of their age. Their bows were sheathed in iron plates to break the ice. Steam engines had been installed, repurposed from old railway locomotives, allowing limited mechanical propulsion if the wind failed. The decks were lined with heating pipes connected to coal-burning boilers to keep the interior livable during Arctic winters. They even carried a library of more than 1,000 books, a small organ for church services, and fine china for the officers' table. The Admiralty spared no expense. If any expedition could succeed where others had perished, it was this one. On May 19, 1845, the two ships set sail from Greenhithe, England, under the command of Franklin with 129 men on board. Crowds lined the Thames to cheer them off. The ships were seen as the pride of the empire, symbols of science, courage, and faith in human progress. Among the officers were men like Captain Francis Crozier, second in command, a seasoned polar veteran from Ireland, cautious, loyal, and deeply respected by his crew, and Commander James Fitzjames, young, brilliant, and idealistic, the kind of man who still believed the Arctic could be conquered by skill and willpower. Their orders were clear: sail west across Baffin Bay, through Lancaster Sound, and continue along any channel that led toward the Pacific. If successful, Franklin would return by 1847, a national hero, but if they failed, the Arctic would keep them. The voyage began well. They reached the coast of Greenland by June, stopping briefly at Disco Bay to load fresh meat, coal, and a pair of cows for milk. There, the expedition's last letters home were sent. They spoke of optimism, calm seas, and the strange beauty of icebergs glowing blue in the midnight sun. Then they sailed west, into the unknown. By late July, they were spotted for the last time by a British whaling ship, the Prince of Wales, in Lancaster Sound. Franklin and his men waved cheerfully from their decks. The whalers shouted a final farewell. No one could have imagined that no living soul aboard Erebus or Terror would ever be seen again. The first winter came early. The ships became trapped in the pack ice near Beechy Island, a desolate, wind-swept rock surrounded by shifting ice floes. Here, they set up winter quarters, built snow walls for protection, and carried on as best they could. They celebrated Christmas with music and theater. The officers even staged plays for morale. But when the thaw came in 1846, 3 of their men were already dead: John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Braine. Their bodies later found perfectly preserved in permafrost, still wearing their uniforms, eyes half open. The cause was uncertain. Perhaps pneumonia, perhaps lead poisoning from the tinned food that had been sealed with contaminated solder. Whatever it was a warning of the darkness to come. When the ice broke, Franklin pushed onward. The ship sailed south through Wellington Channel, then west into Peel Sound, searching for an opening toward the Pacific. But the ice closed again. By September 1846, both ships were trapped near King William Island, frozen fast in a labyrinth of ice so thick that it would never fully melt again. There they stayed, motionless, through one of the coldest winters in Arctic memory. Inside the ships, life slowly turned from discipline to endurance. The men took turns sawing ice from the hulls, measuring temperatures and writing in their journals. They ate preserved meat, biscuits, and lemon juice to ward off scurvy. But as weeks turned to months, strange symptoms appeared. Trembling hands, blackened gums, madness. Lead from the food tins and the ship's pipes had poisoned them. Their bodies were breaking down, their minds unraveling. Yet discipline held. They were Royal Navy men, bound by routine even in hell. Every morning a bell rang for muster. The officers wore their uniforms. The Union Jack flew above the frozen decks. In April 1847, Sir John Franklin died. Quietly, perhaps of heart failure or exposure. He was buried somewhere on the ice, his grave still undiscovered. Command passed to Crozier, who recorded their desperate situation in a note later found by rescuers. It read, HM ships Terror and Erebus were deserted on the 22nd April 1848. Sir John Franklin died on the 11th June 1847. The officers and crew, consisting of 105 souls under the command of Captain Crozier, have proceeded to try to reach the Back River. It was the last message ever written by a member of the Franklin expedition. Outside, the Arctic was silent. The wind carved strange sounds through the rigging. The ice moaned as if alive, and the ships, trapped, abandoned, creaking in the cold, seemed to breathe on their own. When the men finally marched south across the ice, the Erebus and Terror were left behind, frozen in place, like two living ghosts waiting for centuries beneath the snow. The Arctic had swallowed them whole. The year is 1848. The Arctic is not a place. It's a punishment. A white desert where air burns like fire and the sun circles endlessly, never rising, never setting. Here, two ships lie frozen in eternal twilight, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Built for glory, armored for conquest, they were meant to carve a route through the fabled Northwest Passage, completing the map of the world. But the ice had other plans. Their masts stabbed through snow like gravestones. Their decks are buried in drifts taller than men. And somewhere on that horizon of endless white, a line of figures moves, the survivors of Franklin's expedition, 105 men marching south into nothing. Each step is agony. Each breath, a choice between life and surrender. Behind them, the Erebus and Terror are being swallowed, the groaning of the ice like a living thing consuming them whole. Ahead lies only distance and silence. Captain Francis Crozier leads the survivors. An Irish veteran of polar voyages, he knows the ice better than any man alive. But even he cannot map madness. The men drag sledges that weigh nearly 1,000 pounds, stacked with rations, tools, and absurd relics of civilization, silver spoons, books, a writing desk. They pull them like oxen, faces blackened by frostbite, eyes hollow from hunger. When one collapses, the others strip his coat, divide his food, and move on. The ice doesn't stop, and neither can they. They follow the coast of King William Island, hoping to reach the Canadian mainland. Maybe they'll find Inuit hunters. Maybe a Hudson's Bay post, but the compasses spin without meaning. Every direction looks the same, a horizon without mercy. They walk because stopping means dying. By summer, the snow begins to melt, and with it, the truth surfaces. Broken tents, scattered tin cans, bones cracked open, the marrow scraped clean. Decades later, searchers find these remains, and the evidence is undeniable. The starving men turned on one another. At first they ate the dead, Then, the living. Forensic studies a century later confirm it. Knife marks on bone, traces of boiling. It wasn't rumor or slander. It was survival at the edge of humanity. Yet even in that horror, discipline held. They carried logs, built graves, marched under orders long after hope was gone. They were no longer explorers, only pilgrims in a land that demanded everything. Back in England, months turned into years of silence, but one voice refused to fade. Lady Jane Franklin. She wrote letters to Parliament, to the Admiralty, to newspapers, demanding a search. Her determination forced the Empire's hand. In 1848, the first of dozens of rescue missions set sail, British, American, even private ventures. They scoured the Arctic, but the sea swallowed them too. Ships vanished, men froze. The trail ended in fog and frost. It was as if Franklin's expedition had stepped off the edge of the world and kept walking. Then the Arctic began to give up its dead. In 1850, rescuers reached Beechey Island and found 3 graves, Torrington, Hartnell, and Braine, the first winter's victims. When their bodies were exhumed over a century later, they were nearly perfect, faces intact, eyelashes preserved. Science revealed why. Their bones were filled with lead. The tinned food meant to save them had poisoned them, the solder in every can leaking toxin into every meal. They hadn't just been dying from hunger or cold, they were being poisoned from within. In 1854, explorer John Ray heard Inuit hunters speak of starving white men dragging sledges years earlier. The bodies they found bore signs of cannibalism. Ray reported the truth and was branded a liar. Even Charles Dickens defended the Empire's honor, insisting no Englishman would ever stoop to savagery. But time proved Ray right. Science and Inuit memory together told the truth the Empire couldn't face. Franklin's men had died not as heroes, but as humans. Even after the men were gone, the ships lived on. Inuit hunters told stories of wooden islands drifting through the ice, smoke curling from chimneys, voices whispering across the wind. When modern researchers studied these oral histories, they found startling accuracy. One ship had drifted south, the other remained trapped, perfectly preserved. Ropes through holes in the ice suggested survivors had returned, perhaps to shelter one last time. If they did, they never left again. The Erebus and Terror became frozen tombs, monuments to obsession and endurance. Between 1848 and 1859, more than 40 expeditions searched for answers. They left cairns, caches, and desperate messages in brass and stone. One note, found in 1859 by Francis Leopold McClintock, confirmed it all. Sir John Franklin died, June 11, 1847. The ships have been deserted. The survivors are attempting to march south. A few lines of ink, the epitaph of an empire's dream. And then, silence again, for more than 160 years, until 2014. When sonar scans revealed the Erebus upright on the seafloor, her bell still in place. 2 years later, the Terror was found, almost untouched, windows unbroken, dishes still neatly stacked, a ghost frozen in time. Divers describe it as peaceful, not wreckage but waiting, a ship ready to sail again if only someone whispered the order. The Franklin expedition was more than a tragedy. It was a mirror, showing how far humanity would go to fill the blank spaces on a map. The Arctic didn't kill them out of malice. It simply revealed their limits. The bones of those men rest beneath the snow. The ships sleep in black water, swaying gently in the currents, and above them the wind still hums through the rigging, whispering the same cold truth that began their story. The ocean never forgets. It keeps what belongs to it, and somewhere beneath that endless ice, Erebus and Terror still sail, not through water but through memory. For more than a century, the Arctic kept its secret. The ships of Franklin, Erebus, and Terror drifted beneath the ice like two frozen hearts, sealed in darkness, untouched by time. Generations searched. None came close. By the 21st century, the story had become legend, a tale of ambition and arrogance, of an empire humbled by nature. But legends wait, and the Arctic, patient as ever, was not done speaking. In 2008, more than 160 years after Franklin vanished, a new generation set out to find his ships, not sailors, but archaeologists, Inuit elders, and scientists. The search was guided not only by sonar and satellite, but by Inuit oral tradition, stories passed down for generations that spoke of a ship drifting south and another sunk upright in shallow water. For years, such accounts were dismissed as folklore. Now, science was listening, and soon, the instruments began to echo the stories. In September 2014, sonar scans in the icy waters of Wilkinson Sound revealed a shape, a shadow on the seafloor that slowly resolved into something unmistakable. A ship. Divers descended. There she was, HMS Erebus, resting upright, her deck open to the dim Arctic light. Cabin doors still closed, the wheel in place, the bell unbroken. For 170 years she had kept her vigil beneath the ice, perfectly preserved by the cold that had claimed her crew. The discovery stunned the world. Headlines called it history resurfacing, but even as the world celebrated, one question remained. Where was terror? 2 years later, in 2016, the answer came from an Inuit hunter, Sami Kogvik, who recalled seeing a mast sticking out of the ice on King William Island. Researchers followed his lead, lowering a camera through the sea ice. What they found took their breath away. There, lying on the seabed in near-perfect condition, was HMS Terror. Her hull intact, her windows unbroken, her cabins untouched. Even the shelves were still lined with bottles and dishes stacked neatly in place. It wasn't a wreck, it was a time capsule. The Arctic had preserved her, the cold had wrapped her in silence and memory. Over the next years, divers and archaeologists mapped both ships. They found uniform buttons, medical tools, compasses, fragments of journals, and on Terror, bunks, shoes, and a desk still sealed shut, perhaps with the crew's final words inside. Each object told a story of life frozen mid-breath. For historians, it was a revelation. For descendants of the lost, it was closure. But the wrecks also raised questions. Why were the ships so far apart? Did some men, maybe Crozier himself, survive longer than anyone thought? Archaeological discoveries on King William Island revealed new traces, campsites, tools, even remnants of fires. They suggested some survivors adapted, trying to live off the land after abandoning the ships. Some experts believe Crozier and a few men reboarded Terror, using her as shelter before she finally sank. Others think they made it to the mainland, nearly 400 miles, only to perish within sight of safety. No proof exists, but the pattern of artifacts and Inuit testimony makes one thing clear. The story didn't end when the ships were abandoned. It lingered quietly for years. Today, in the conservation labs of Parks Canada, divers and historians clean and study what the Arctic has returned. Boots, glass bottles sealed with 19th century air, and fragments of journals. Each artifact is a whisper from the past. Only a few rooms of the wrecks have been entered. Most remain sealed, preserved by the cold, the perfect museum no human could build. Divers describe the experience as walking into a cathedral, quiet, vast, and sacred. It isn't death they feel there, but presence. To the Inuit, none of this was a surprise. Their ancestors had always said the ice remembers. In their world, nothing is ever truly lost, only waiting to be found again. The wrecks of Erebus and Terror are not relics of empire. They are bridges between worlds, between science and story, ambition and humility, life and endurance. The Arctic didn't destroy Franklin's men out of cruelty. It reminded us of scale, of how small human certainty is beside the endless sea. Today, the Franklin expedition is no longer remembered as failure, but as a lesson. It taught us that exploration isn't conquest, it's conversation. It revealed that indigenous knowledge, once ignored, held the very truths science needed centuries to uncover. When Inuit elders and Canadian archaeologists worked side by side, they weren't just uncovering wrecks, they were healing history. The voices once dismissed became the key to solving Empire's greatest mystery. That is the true redemption of Franklin's voyage. Not the glory of discovery, but the humility of listening. When divers leave the wrecks, they say the sea closes behind them like a door. The silence returns. The current hums, ancient and alive. Through the ice, you can still glimpse their shadows, two ships side by side, frozen mid-voyage. They are not wrecks, but monuments, proof that the ocean does not forget, it only waits. The Erebus and Terror began as ships of empire. They ended as ships of memory. And long after their crews vanished, they kept sailing, not through water, but through time. Because when the last hand leaves the wheel, the ship remembers. It sails itself, carried by the wind, the current, and the story it was built to tell. The ocean never forgets. It only waits. And when it finally speaks, it does so not with thunder, but with a whisper through the timbers of a ship that refused to die.